sounds great. Well, yeah, nice to meet you all. Thanks for joining us here today. This is Coming to Chapter New York. I'm Zach. I am the marketing manager with Capital BPM. And yeah, we'll kind of get into it. This is essentially, can everybody see my screen? Okay, cool. So this is essentially what our agenda will look like for today. I'll introduce our speakers, Max and Thales, and then we'll go into our topic of the importance and usage of AI in process testing. Max and Thales will give an introduction on what they're talking about and kind of the outline for the discussion. And then we'll have any questions, comments, or concerns at the end. So to introduce Max, he is our principal with Capital BPM. He's a certified Camunda expert with a history in Pega, IBM, and executive leadership in the Bay Area. Master's degree in mathematics and AI, and currently he's in Greenville with his wife and his two sons. So Max, if I'll go ahead and pass it over to you here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Max. I'm with Cap BPM and working in this space for a long time. Talis, let's go over to Talis's bio, please. So, Zach, you want to introduce Talis?
Yeah. So Talis is a process analyst at Kit4U and a contributor at Agile Kit. It's an open source project devoted to facilitate process workflow and automation initiatives using code generation techniques. His academic background is in electronics with a BSc in management engineering. He's currently an MSc candidate studying process flexibility, test automation, and software quality. He loves to learn, meet new people, and connect with nature. So welcome, Thales.
Thank you very much for the not so brief introduction. When I wrote it, I thought it was kind of brief, but yeah, it sounds was not that brief. And yeah, I'm excited to be here, and I'm looking forward to discussing test automation and test processing using AI. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to the discussions and see what comes next.
Yeah, Talis and I kind of have a history in the background of just nerding out about this stuff. This is a very interesting topic to both of us, and we've actually met and like co-presented to each other on this. It's I think my brain is exploding with all the interesting possibilities that are available right now. So you want to Zach, you want to read us through the agenda today, and then we'll get there.
Yeah, so again, we'll be talking about importance and usage of AI in process testing. So Max will kind of dive into, with Thales, we'll dive into decomposing BPM, figuring out paths a process can take, relevant synthetic data, overriding timers, integrating testing, all the good stuff there, and how we can address each item. Max will give his approach, Thales will give his approach, and then we'll answer any questions at the end.
Yeah. So let me start this off by saying, sorry, I was trying to be clever with my Alexa and I turned off my own lights. So let me kind of talk about the problem and the love and the hate of testing with process applications. So typically when you have like a traditional application, like a Java application or .NET or whatever, you have a unit of functionality. Right? You write code that's supposed to get information out of the database or update the database or do something atomic. And that lends itself to testing, right? Now, you can test, hey, what happens if I put in bad data? What if I try to pull back too many records? What if I'm trying to page and I do something wrong? With a process, it is several orders of magnitude more complicated because you can have interplay between different invocations. You can have human factors that complicate things. You can have roles, you can have automation, and you can have sort of a negative side effect thing. Like I'm trying to read something from the database while someone else is updating it. It becomes an order of magnitude more complicated to test a process because your use cases are not atomic anymore, right? It's like a matrix. You're taking multi-dimensional problems and you have to apply them. And the problem that I see is that a lot of times you can have a process diagram, and it has, say, I don't know, 10 steps. And we on the process side will go, oh, well, we could improve this. We could put a gateway at the beginning and skip these 7 steps if the customer doesn't have the right credit score or something. That's great. That's fine. That's what you're supposed to do with process. But in the realities of living in an organization, when you do that, the QA team will come back to you and go, whoa, 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 what are you doing? You've just doubled the amount of possible use cases because you've introduced a gateway at the beginning of a process. So now when there were 10 pass through, now there are 20 pass through. I'm going to need time and budget and manpower, and we're going to have to schedule this. So your next generation, next iteration of the project slows down. I see this happen all the time. You go into a project, you have executive sponsorship, the Commando's on board, the vendor's on board, the client's on board. We build something, we deliver it in 6 months. Everyone goes rah rah sis kumbah. We're all happy. And then after the party, after everybody says, okay, we're great, then you try to make an improvement, and you run into this slag, because what happens is the QA team is like, whoa, 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 how are we doing this? And the project manager is like, wait a minute, who's going to budget for this? How are we going to roll this out in time? You can't just be making changes. So what happens then is people say, well, what if we then, my Java is calling like a RESTful API to put information into the database. What if we just move the logic into that? And that way, we're not changing the process, and it becomes easier to test. So you do this several times, and all of a sudden, you've kind of wormed your way back into the prehistoric cave, and you've got a traditional application with a bunch of nested if statements and so on and so forth in your Java language or your .NET language to deal with the complexity, because that's easier to test than this new paradigm of process-driven stuff, right? So that is sort of the big problem that I see, which is that once you've got this thing walking and talking, you've got to find a way to be able to improve it and not lose your mojo and your momentum that you adopted from a Commando or a BPM process perspective. Talis, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I agree 100%. Every time you have something new, a new requirement, you're gonna make a different, a new element pops in the workflow, the business process model notation, the BPM, and then everything goes like stop. Like we have to think about it. We have to think of all possible outcomes of it, and it's even worse when that's not within the same flow as I mean as in an event-based sub process that's not even captured within that same flow. So you have all the test cases within that flow of a given flow, and then something is happening somewhere else that might trigger something out of that flow, and then that interaction could happen at any given time within the flow. So you don't have a specific point where you say to the tester like, hey, so then you come here, and then when this happens, you trigger something. No, that could happen at any given time. So that's, people tend to go nuts when that happens, because it's like humanly impossible. It's humanly, like, it's not feasible for a human to see all possible outcomes. I don't know who here is like a geek, like, but I really love to think about it. When you see Avengers Endgame, the movie, and then you have a Doctor Strange with the time stone, and he's like looking at all possibilities, and then it's like one, oh yeah, this one. So it's like you have to be like superhuman to have everything in your mind to see all possible outcomes, and this small difference here, and where all of that's gonna affect. Like it's really difficult. So everyone tends to just freeze. Like I'm not gonna touch it. I'm not gonna touch it. So yeah, usually that's how I see it.
Yeah, and you throw in, like you said, you throw in like callable processes, or you throw in like events and timers and asynchronous non-interrupting events and so on. It's a hairy problem. Like in the real world, it gets messy. So you need a science in order to deal with it. Zach, could you throw up the last screen for just a moment, please?
What were you asking for me to throw up?
The last page of the presentation that you had up.
Yeah. 1 second.
So this is a place where I think AI can help us, right? Because with AI, you can delegate out a lot of this grunt work, so that you can do some of the heavy lifting in a way that it is not manual. So when I think about this problem, it decomposes into four issues for me. Number one is figuring out the paths that a process can take. So, we have a process. It has, hey, could you enable me share my screen, please? Whoever is able to enable me to do that.
Yeah, I just need to stop sharing. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, if you're looking at like a process, like something like this, you imagine, well, there's so many paths through this process. But then you introduce a timer, and now that's an alternative path through this process. And then, maybe you come over here and you put in like a couple of gateways, and you're like, well, if this gateway
We are
happens,
seeing Commander Cockpit, just to,
oh,
we're not seeing the modeler, we're seeing Commander Cockpit.
all right, let me try that again. Share screen, window, Commander Modeler. There we go. So, you have like a process like this, and you can imagine, oh, we come here, we go to the gateway, we follow this path, or we come up here and we follow this path. And maybe a human being could keep track of this, but then, you start adding in complexity. Well, what if we introduce a gateway over here and it loops back, from here back to over here? And then what if, we go from over here to over here, and then this can go over here, but it can also, take us back to this one over here. It starts to become a pretty hairy problem. And I think it becomes very, very important to be able to keep up with this problem, to be able to say, hey, we need a systematic way that we can generate tests for all of this as it's happening. So I think that's sort of the first stage of the problem. Would you be kind enough to bring up the next part of this? I'm sorry, Zach, would you go back to the presentation for just a moment? Because I want to have the list so I can refer to it.
Yes, there we go.
So the next problem you've got to deal with is data, right? So we are talking about a customer, but it is implicit that the customer live in the Western United States. Or we need to make sure that if we're generating 1,000 customers, that social security numbers are in a certain format, or phone numbers are in a certain format, or that customers can have pets and those pets have these fields. And how do we generate intelligently, quickly, data sets that we can run through this process, so that when we are updating a loan application or updating, an onboarding document or whatever it is, that we can generate synthetic data in a quick way in order to be able to test it. The next thing that I think we have to talk about are timers and integration with external systems. So, hey, my process has a 10-hour timer to make sure that the warehouse back in Beijing has the items that we need, but I don't want to wait 10 hours in order to be able to run my test. How do I overwrite that? Or how do I get an artificial signal back from an external system, so I'm not waiting for, an inordinate amount of time in order to be able to drive that? And then, finally, how do I do all of this in an automated way, so that when my process evolves, I don't have to break the CI/CD pipeline and I can be a part of it. So, you can imagine your CI/CD pipeline spins up databases and APIs in like your dev environment or your QA environment, and then it builds out your process and it goes and it runs some pre-existing tests. But that whole process can be broken if you're the weak link in the chain, and the process keeps you from being able to do that. Talis, I talked about all this. I'd like to get your take on each one of these topics as well.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I was. Sorry, I was ahead of you. I was like throwing this before, but that's it exactly when you have things happening not within the exact scope of the process. That could happen outside, that could happen given timers, that could happen given, and that could really uh, break not the process, because the process is solid, but break your testing process, or like testing the process. That could really break and make it a headache for the tester.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and it's a real problem that's not obvious because it's kind of an unknown. Like if you're starting your first Commando project, the idea of not being able to make changes so fast that your QA department can't keep up with you sounds like a fantastic problem. Like I wish this is an aspirational problem. It's like saying I wish I had too much money, right? But it's a real problem. Like what are you going to do if you succeed? What do you do if you're the dog that catches the car? What are you actually going to do with it, right? And I think that that's where that's where this kind of comes in. So Talis and I have both seen this problem in our professional life. Talis, you've been doing this for 6, 7 years. Is that right?
I've been dealing specific with software processes quality for the past 3 to 4 years, but I
Okay.
was into uh, process modeling, but more in a like theoretical way, and more for a longer time, but hands-on for the past 3 to 4 years. Yes.
And Talis and I are both sort of in the consulting business, right? So what happens to us is we don't have like one problem. We have the same problem over and over again, right? We get airdropped into a customer, they have to solve this problem. And then we go to another customer and they have the same problem, right? And so we see a lot of this. So it sort of independently our thoughts sort of formed on this. So I actually want to change order just a little bit here and talk about how you can think about this problem. And then I want Talis to do a demonstration of an open source sort of approach that he's taking for this. And then I'm going to talk about sort of a vendor specific way that we're taking for this. But again, it's all around the same problem. And the important thing is not necessarily a specific solution, but it's to understand what it is that you're sticking your foot into here. So, Talis, do you want to talk about your approach and how you guys are doing it, and whether it's open source and who can download it and who can use it and all that kind of stuff?
Sure. Uh, we have a platform which is I'm part of a research group called Agile Kip, and which we mix agile approaches with. I don't know if you're aware of what KIP means. KIP means knowledge intensive processes, which are processes that are in its own nature. They need flexibility. They are unstructured. So it doesn't matter if you model a process, a beautiful process, something is going to happen at a given time that's going to be different. And that comes into play when you're dealing with software development. Software development is an artful process, is a knowledge intensive process. You don't always have the same order. Things happen more than once, and things happen at a different time. You have that in medical care, healthcare systems. Like it happens every time. Every case is a different case, so it doesn't matter. You don't have a specific timeline that always happens. Things happen in a different way. Emergencies, catastrophes, they're all knowledge intensive processes. You mean there's someone that is able to capture from their own experience, or for them from their collective experience, and try to deduct what they're going to do next, but it's not always the same. It changes every time. So that is a knowledge intensive process. So what that means is testing a structured process is hell. Thinking about testing an unstructured process is not even hell. There is not even a name for that. It's like you don't even know what you should do next. So we have two approaches that I'm developing in my master's. That would be the linear approach, and that would be like the blind approach. The blind approach is you start a process, and you generate a set of fake data for that process, and you have no idea what's going to come next. But whatever comes next, you act on that specific execution, and then blindly you generate data, and then you go into it, and then comes the next task. You don't actually know the flow that the path's going, the process is going to take. But then by the end of it, and that's the brute force of it, the blindness of it, is that you execute 100 times that process instance. And then at the end of it, you look back and you see, oh, 40 times I got this repeated pattern. 30 times I got this repeated pattern. 20 times and 10 times. So I have these 4 different patterns of execution of this process. And so I kind of have 4 different process patterns. That's kind of in the realm of process mining, but it doesn't mean that I covered all possibilities of that process. It just means that by brute force, I I bump my head into these user tasks or these whatever, and then I got 4 different patterns. But that doesn't mean I covered it all. And that's like intensive in energy. You're using a lot of computing power. You're using a lot of, but you're doing it. And the other approach is going through a more linear approach in which you have an algorithm. You have minimum spanning tree, you have a depth algorithm in which you can see that graph, because a process model is just a graph. So you see that graph, and then you see all possible ways that a process goes, and every time it forked and what happened, and then you create all those test cases from each node. But the problem is with those, it's really hard. In academy, we never say it's impossible, but because someone was going to come up with something, some crazy genius, but it's really hard to see things that are out of that flow. And that's where comes my problem with event-based gateway, event-based sub processes, or signals that are catching from way out of the process, and then things can change abruptly, and that's not within that path. So the linear approach is more human friendly, and you can see things before it happens. The blind approach, the brute force approach, is you just hammer it, and then you see, you mine the process. Yeah, so we're doing both. And just to finish, just to wrap it up, we use Camunda as our process engine. Um, and we are going for Robot Framework. I don't know if you've ever heard of Robot Framework. It's an open source RPA. They are really cool. They're written in Java and Python. They have a really big library and consistent library. So what we do is we, given what we have in Camunda, we generate the automation for each user task, but we just generate the automation from what information we have about those user tasks, and then you generate the the the, the script for Robot Framework using all fake data. So it just knows, oh, here I need a zip code in Western whatever, so it generates a zip code for that, because you can input like, I need the faker library, please do an input. But that's like barely scratching the surface. We need
Hey,
AI. We need AI.
hey, Talis, could you put a link to the robot framework into
Of
the
course,
discussion so everybody can go follow it up,
of course.
depending
It's
on
but
how.
it's an RPA. You think UiPath, you
Yeah,
think Blue Prism, all of those. It's a RPA.
yep.
So this is Robot Framework. And what we do, the research group that I'm part of, which is called Agile Kip, I'm gonna put here the link as well. We scaffold. I don't know if that's what we scaffold web applications using JHipster. I don't know if you ever heard about
Yep.
JHipster, but we scaffold entire web applications, just given a small set of JSONs that are related to the BPMN that you have and the user tasks. So you scaffold the whole web application using Vue and of course Java, because we're using Camunda 7. And from there, you only spend time in the customizations you need. So you don't spend a lot of time generating the folders and copying and pasting files. So I need no, it generates everything for you, and you only work on customizing whatever you need. but it's functional out of the box, and it's open source. It's an open source project. Feel free to comment. Feel free to reach out to ask
Yep.
questions about it. So yeah, my research group does uh, the web application with scaffolding, and I'm doing automation. I'm doing the automation of the testing using RPA, and it's hellish. That's my final word on it.
The thing I really like about that approach is that when you use RPA, you're really mimicking a user's experience. Like you're logging in, you're bringing up the screen, you're typing stuff in. It's a good way to be as true as possible while still using robots. Let me share my screen about. So I'm going to do an impromptu demo. These things never go well, but let's see what we come up with here. So I'm going to share my screen and talk a little bit about how we approach this. So first, I'm going to go to. I built out this diagram. It's a fairly simple one. So basically, what we have here is we have a process. We have, it starts over here. We wait 5 minutes. We go to a gateway. In the gateway, we look for a variable is approved. If it is approved, we go this way. If it's not approved, we go this way. So the point of this is to kind of show you how our stuff is not free. It is not open source. It's proprietary because we're capitalists. So the stuff I'm showing you is a product that we have, but it's a product that solves the same problem, right? So don't think of this as, oh, this is a product demo. This is just one example of how you could be solving this problem. But there's nothing here that you couldn't do on your own if you wanted to. So let me go to our screen and I can just kind of show you how this works. So we have this tool called Sentinel. And the way the Sentinel works is that you can come in and you can bind to command a server at runtime. In this case, I've bound to one of ours. But most customers will either install this on-prem or they'll use a SaaS offering that we have. So you come in, you enter, hey, this is my server. These are the credentials. This is the environment that it's for. And then once you click on the server, then you can come over here and you can see all the processes that are deployed on that server. In this case, I've got this thing called, hang on a minute. I kept this open for too long and then we've logged out. So you can see over here that I've got this thing called Sentinel Demo, and I'm actually going to go and delete these and we'll come back to it. So this is like an earlier version of Sentinel Demo. And what we do is we use AI because we're very lazy. So the first thing I'll do is I'll come in and I will say Autogen. And what Autogen does is it says, hey, do you want me to examine every possible path through this process and tell you what it could be? And incidentally, do you have a data structure or a set of data structures that are going through this? In my particular case, I do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, I've defined that data structure as a JSON file. So it's a customer JSON file, and it defines a customer. So a customer looks like this. This is just a standard definition. And then I come over here, and then I see that within Sentinel, it's actually created two possible paths. So it goes, oh, well, you could come to this gateway and you could go down, or you could come to this gateway and you could go up. Now, if I actually want to run this test, I have to be able to inject data into this process, because you remember this line over here checks to see if the process, the variable is approved, has been set. So in order to run this, I can actually just come here and I can expand this and I can add a variable. So in this case, I might say, hey, here's a Boolean. The name of the Boolean is approved. Value is going to be true. Save it, run it. And it actually runs through that whole process, right? It'll tell you the path that it followed, and it will highlight for you all the things that have happened. So you can get a report in terms of whether you passed or you failed, and it actually executes the process on the server. So let me show you what I mean by that. If I'm going to go back and I'm going to model a process. I'm going to make a change to it and then show you how that works. So going back over here, I'm going to share my command to cockpit. Not command to cockpit, my command to modeler. Sorry.
While you do that, the beauty when you showed me this, I was like, my eyes were like smiling because what you can do is within a specific uh, flow that you know that you should have the data, you can give false data, like a wrong set of data, so it fails on purpose. So, and that's like the beauty of it, because lots of times people focus on getting the right data on the right flows, and that's not reality. Like, not failing is not doesn't mean that your process is good. Failing is a good thing when you know why you're failing. So yeah, that's beautiful. When you showed me that, I was like really happy. You know what's supposed to happen, and you can change it, and you can see that going wrong. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, so I'm actually I'm I'm excited about this. I love nerding out with this stuff. But let me show you what I mean. What I did was I actually just took this process and I'm just going to make it more complicated. I'm going to add some complexity to it. So I'm going to say, hey, I added another gateway. This gateway is going to check to see. So I'm writing an expression here. Say if, you know, customer is approved, or I guess customer first name is equal to Max. And then, so that's going to be one path. And then this will be the alternative path. And then just to make it a little bit more scary, I'm going to put in like a timer over here. So this timer is going to say, hey, if you take too much time, I'm just going to time you out. I'm going to go over here. So this will be a timer. It'll be, 5 minutes. And it'll be a duration, PT 5 minutes. So you can see I've made this a little bit more complicated. I'm going to save it. I am going to deploy it to my server. And now I'm going to switch back to my tooling. So my tool here, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go to Command to Cloud. I'm going to refresh. We're going to go back to Sentinel demo. And now here's the latest version of it, right? I'm going to come over here. I'm going to say Autogen. And when I Autogen, I'm going to put in this customer schema because I'm going to be using that customer as a part of my payload. So because I've done this, I actually have some interesting stuff. So the first part of this is that I have this ability. Actually, let me come back to this. So I have this ability to do a randomizer. So because I read that customer, I can actually write a grammar. And the grammar can say, hey, why don't you go and generate 10 random customers for me? And it's fairly smart. So it knows like, hey, first names, that's probably a first name or a last name. So it uses a grammar that, automatically generates this kind of stuff. And then I can come back over to my scenarios, and I can actually see here that within each one of my guys, it's actually going to auto-gen my scenario here. Sorry. You can actually see here that it comes back and it is building. Oh, this is the first scenario where if the timer goes off, then it generates the second scenario where it's not the timer, it's just you go to this gateway and you come over here and then it goes to this other thing and you go down instead of going to no path as opposed to going the yes path. This one does the yes path, and then this one does all the way through. So you just come over here, that's approved, and you go this way. So in order to run this, you're pretty much set. All I have to do is I have to go over here to this first step, and I can say, hey, I want to add a variable. The variable is going to be a Boolean. It's going to be is approved, and it's going to be true. So I'll save it, and that's it. That actually will run it. So it's actually executing that test now. It's going through the process. And that's sort of what we're looking for, right? So within the context of this, it's actually telling you like the path that it follows. It's telling you, exactly where it went. If I wanted to make this a little more complicated, so I could come back over here, for example, and say for the sake of argument, there we go. Let's say I want to override the timer in this particular case. So I can come back and say, well, in this case, I'm actually going to override the timer. And I don't want to wait 5 minutes for this, right? I want it to trigger right now. And part of what you're seeing here is that it's actually happening too fast. So the test is actually executing so fast that I can't actually show it to you. But in this particular case, I can actually come in here and go, hey, I'm going to do a customer. And this customer is going to be like this. And it's actually going to pre-populate it with the randomized data that I put in. I'm going to override max. And I'm going to say, hey, on step number 1, we're doing this after we check off the timer. And it will actually come here. And it will actually run this. So you can actually see that it went through all of these steps here. And it also did like an audit analysis about the goodness of your process, right? So there is, just like you can do with code, you can do like a code smell on this kind of stuff, and you can actually see what happened. So it's actually doing that for you as well. So what it's doing is it's executing the path. It's using AI to figure out what the possible paths are. Further, it is actually using AI to generate synthetic data, and then it's executing that. And this whole thing can be scheduled. So you can say, hey, I want to be able to run this test like on Sundays and Tuesdays from 2 a.m. until, say, 3 a.m. This is going to be a load test, so run it, 10 times or 100 times. It's going to be effective from, say, today until 2 weeks from now. And by the way, if something goes wrong, send me an email. Okay. And then this becomes a schedule thing so that you can actually see it happening. Or you can even trigger it from an API call. So you can actually use, your CI/CD program can actually trigger the running of this test over here. And then, we have all sorts of like reports around the test, all the times that it's been run. We have like this sort of scenario analysis. So you can actually see what happened with each one of the individual runs that happened. You can schedule all this stuff out. It's a pretty rich, sort of metaphor, and it can actually sort of break down for you what we expect to see. So I'm going to make a quick change here, and I'm actually going to go put in a timer at the end of the process, so you can actually see this thing. So it's not, happening so fast that you can't validate it. So in this particular case, can you guys see my modeler?
Not now.
Okay, let me bring that up. So share screen window, come on to modeler. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to modify this process a little bit. I'm going to get rid of this guy, and I am going to introduce a timer. So this will be a message, timer intermediate catch events, 5 minutes, duration, PT 5M. Basically, all of my end paths are going to end up here first. And this is just so that, you can kind of see the state of the process. So it'll come here, it'll pause for 5 minutes. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to deploy it. I'm going to stop sharing this, share my screen again. So I'm going to come back to my tester. I'm going to go to Sentinel Demo 1. I go to this. It picks up the latest version right now in real time. I'm going to do an Autogen, and I am going to load my customer schema. So now, for the sake of argument, let me just choose a slightly easier one here. So yeah, this will be a scenario where it's not approved and the customer's name is not Max. So in order to do this, I'm going to come over here to step number 1, and I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to add a variable. The variable is going to be Boolean is approved. That's going to be equal to false, which is the default. And then I am going to add another variable, which is going to be the customer. And this customer is going to be an object. And I'm just going to keep what they have here, but maybe the last name will be, I don't know, Robinson. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say, run this guy. So now, if we come back over to our process, and we go to Sentinel Review, Sentinel Demo, here's the process. You can actually see it, and you can actually see that it did what we expected it to do. So here's the actual data that we put in, Garrett Robinson. So this is really happening this fast, right? This ability to change data and drive it through the process. Now, just for grins, I'm also going to show you how to make a test fail. So in this particular case, I'm going to come back.
Failing tests.
There we go. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to say, my expectation is that at the end of, say, step number 1,
we're still on cockpit.
Am I? Sorry. So
okay,
let's just make this. So I'm going to say at, I don't know, the end of step number 4, because that's one of the steps that we go through. My expectation is that the customer first name will be equal to Bob. So I can be very specific. My criteria for passing or failing a test can be one field or multiple fields or an entire object in terms of what we actually expect. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to run this test again. And you can see here that it actually failed on step number 4. And when you actually look at it, it tells you exactly why it failed. Right? So what this does is, and all this stuff can be driven by APIs, right? So imagine that you have a scenario where you've automated this, that every time the process is checked in, we auto-generate the scenarios. And then when we trigger the CI/CD pipeline, it just runs the latest test with all the scenarios that are defined, right? So now your test is automatically keeping up with you. And you can go tell the QA department that they don't have to worry about testing your process, right? We can give that part of the budget right back. Does all this make sense?
Yeah.
Questions, concerns, thoughts?
I mean, I'm the weakest link here because I don't have the same programming knowledge that the others do with my position. So, but from a 10,000 foot level, yes, I feel I understand it.
Very cool. Justin, what do you think? Do you run into this a lot?
Yeah. I somewhat recently approached this using Cucumber and Gherkin to try and come up with a nice framework for walking through all of our workflows and a bunch of generic methods to do it. So and it's working. I'm pretty happy with it, and works in our CI/CD environment. But yeah, this is obviously a more sophisticated solution. But.
Yeah, that was the point. This is not a product demo. It's not to say that this is the only way to do it. Like, Talents obviously has an open source and community oriented way of doing it, but this is a problem that has to be solved, right? Because if you don't, you're going to paint yourself into a corner. Everyone in the company is going to be excited. You delivered an 18-month project in 6 months, and everyone's, woo, that's great. And then they're going to want you to do it again, and you can't, right? Because you're stuck. You can't change it because the other parts of the organization that you have to work with are not prepared to support you. And that's where this kind of stuff really comes in.
Swami, you wanna give your feedback, because I do wanna make a provocation here. So. Umakant, wanna say something? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yeah, it is high. It is a mind blowing. Certainly, it will help, and it covers all the scenarios and also a lot of other utilities associated with it. So this is very new, and I'm very much interested to know the technicalities of all those the basic requirements of this. So this is very useful for telecom domain also, where complex order scenarios and all those can be generated using this. So this is very useful.
Very cool. Very cool.
I agree. Max, could I steal 2 or 3 minutes?
Yeah.
No, I just want to make because I love what Wayne said. I have no idea. I have no idea what's your background, Wayne. But you say like, oh, not a coder, a developer from, or you said like from a distance. What I love about working with BPMN is that I don't know if you know the V model, where like the requirements enter and then like people think about it and they break down into like what should be coded, and then you code it, and then you test unit, and then like unit testing, and then integrated, and then acceptance, and then but what happens that usually the person that knows what the requirements were, that's the best person to make the acceptance test, because it knows exactly what the client said to him. And that used to be like very different artifacts. What I love about BPMN is that like it's spot on. Everyone is looking at the same artifact. The change you make here, everyone is aware and everyone is seeing it. And so that's beautiful about BPMN and about like the whole process. Like the person that is gathering the requirements is kind of a developer as well, and is like 100% empowered to be the tester. Like you can be everywhere because everything goes back to the same artifact. So I love BPMN and this approach because of this. Like it's just really, really, really cool.
Yeah, I'll tag on to that, and I'll say one of the things I've always loved about software in general is TDD, test-driven development, right? And so you could imagine that the person that Thomas is talking about, that designer of the process, would come through, use a tool like this, and articulate what it means to succeed before the code is even written, right? You write 1, 10, 100 scenarios. Hey, if I am writing a loan application and the person comes in with $100,000 and 2 years of job history and a 700 credit rating, they should get this interest rate approved at this amount of time, and so on and so forth. Like they can articulate out the tests before the code is written, and then you write to pass the test. So there's an empirical objective criteria for success that everyone agrees to. So it's not just what Thomas said, which would be plenty, right? The ability to be able to have the business and IT kind of agree on exactly what's supposed to happen, but to have the business and IT agree on exactly what just happened. Like, I think that's really cool. Okay, so this Nerdfest has been just exactly almost on time. Anyone else have any comments? Talis, did you have anything you want to finish us off with?
I always have. No, I just wanted to say, like, tell Justin that he just threw an arrow to my knee when he talked about gherkin and like, and you said about talking about TDD. One thing that I would love to still implement one day is because the way you generate the tests and you have all of that explicit, what should be inputted and what are the paths, and that's really, in the end, that's NLP. That's natural language. Like,
Yeah.
it's easy for someone to understand, and also nowadays we have the power for a machine to understand that as well. So we're coming to the point where we generate artifacts that are easily understandable by humans. And with these large language models, they are easily like understandable by those AIs. So you can generate like a huge documentation about the test and about everything that happens with Gherkin. So it's really easy, or with tables, it's really
Yeah.
easy for a human to understand, but an AI can look at that and say like, oh, I understand that too, and
Yeah.
it gets from that and it generates back to you. So we are getting to some small artifacts that are easily understandable for by everyone involved, humans and non-humans, and that is really beautiful. And I'm still going to implement one day in my life the concept of living documentation. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, and that's really very much based on Gherkin. So yeah, you just threw an arrow to my knee. It hurt. It hurts because I wasn't able to implement that yet.